Hello and welcome. I'm Kriti Mehta and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's start with a check of the top headlines. Yemen's Presidential Council cancels UAE defense deal, paving the way for UAE forces in Yemen to leave within 24 hours. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, Donald Trump among world leaders to express concern over the attack on Russian President Vladimir Putin's residence. Ukraine's foreign minister called on other countries to refrain from responding to what he said were false Russian reports about an attack on Vladimir Putin's residence, saying they undermined the peace process. Taiwan's defense ministry says PLA rockets fell into areas that were closest to main Taiwan Island compared to previous drills. Donald Trump says the United States could support another major strike on Iran if it rebuilds missiles on nuclear programs and warns Hamas of severe consequences if it does not disarm. Speaking alongside Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he suggests Tehran may be trying to restore its weapons capabilities. A senior advisor to Iran's supreme leader warns that any aggression against the country will face an immediate harsh response. After Donald Trump threatens to eradicate any nuclear rebuilding, he says Iran's missile and defense capabilities are not containable and will be used if provoked. US President Donald Trump says he is not concerned about China's military drills around Taiwan, calling them long-standing naval exercises. The comments come as Beijing stages blockade-style maneuvers near the island following a large US arms sale to Taiwan. Meta Platforms Meta is buying AI startup Manus to deepen into agentic AI, aiming to embed the technology across its platforms as competition for next-gen AI intensifies. Viewers, now Ukraine has ordered the evacuation of more than a dozen settlements in the northern Chernihiv region, which borders Moscow-allied Belarus, and has been the target of Russian shelling. This comes as Russia continues to intensify its campaign against Ukraine amid ongoing peace talks in Florida and discussion on the 20-point peace plan proposed by US President Donald Trump. Authorities have specifically prioritized the mandatory evacuation of children, often requiring them to be moved in armored vehicles to protect against first-person view drones. Evacuees are typically directed to transit centers in safer regions like Dnipropetrovsk or further west to Lviv and Rivne, which they receive psychologically support and cash assistance from groups like UNHCR. All right, I now invite Professor Wesleyan Popovsky, who is a professor and vice dean at the Jindal Global Law School, to join me. Thank you very much, Professor, for joining me once again. And now Ukraine, of course, ordering evacuation in areas near Belarus. Is a retaliatory attack imminent after reports of Putin's house being struck?
Well, Russia is bombing everything for 4 years. So I don't know what is retaliation for what, but it's clear that civilians, unfortunately, in Ukraine are not safe and they need to be evacuated. So any intelligence saying that they are not safe, they should be taken seriously. And accordingly, those orders come, and Ukraine is trying to protect its civilians. And it will continue doing that. And by the way, interestingly, if we notice the number of casualties, that has been minimized recently in the last 3 months. September was a very heavy heavy toll on civilian casualties. And since that has been minimized, there were obviously electricity cuts and other suffering of the Ukrainian civilians. But that signals to us that Ukraine, with the help of the European countries, could now protect its civilians better and less casualties are also some good news, meaning that there are more air defense systems to protect the cities and the civilians in Ukraine. But evacuation is necessary when some intelligence tells us that those people would be in jeopardy, at risk.
Professor, what do you make of the strikes on Putin's residence that Russia alleges is by Ukraine?
Oh, this should continue. Putin should be under daily strike because he's the aggressor here, and the aggressor must be punished, as all aggressors in history were punished. So if that continues, more better. I would welcome to try Ukrainian to try to do this again and again. Putin, as a major war criminal and aggressor in the last now 11 years since he annexed Crimea, must be under attack, as well as every other military target in Ukraine, every general, every officer, every soldier, every ammunition, including oil and gas refineries, oil tankers. All these are military targets. Ukrainian will continue targeting those, and more better.
Well, Professor, you are saying that Ukraine will continue targeting, but Ukraine has denied that it carried out these strikes.
So, it did, but we don't know. Again, they probably deny because they don't want to escalate the conflict. We will see what happens and who. I'll say it was even better if the Russian opposition, if the Russians who are disillusioned with Putin tried to kill him. In the same way as Muammar Gaddafi and Saddam Hussein and other dictators were, in fact, Adolf Hitler was several times. There were assassination attempts on those in the past. So Putin should worry Russians more than Ukrainians. You're absolutely right, Kriti, here. That there is no safe place for Putin. He doesn't only endanger the lives of Ukrainians, but he also killed 1 million Russian soldiers in Ukraine soil. So he's as criminal for the Russians as he's criminal for the Ukrainians and for the rest of the world. So
but Professor, many are saying that Russia would not launch a similar counter-strike targeting Zelensky at least.
I'm sure if they could have done it, they would have done it. They're absolutely merciless. Don't listen to the Russian propaganda. Everything they say is a manipulation. Everything they say is a lie. I don't listen to Russian propaganda and I don't take anything out of Kremlin.
All right, I hear you and all the parties involved. But thank you very much, Professor, for joining me for now. And with that, viewers, we're now going to proceed. Now, student protests erupted across Tehran and Isfahan universities as demonstrators voiced anger over rising prices and declining living standards. The unrest follows recent demonstrations by shopkeepers in Tehran's Grand Bazaar, who shuttered their stores for the second day amid record low currency values. The Iranian rial has fallen sharply against the dollar and euro, worsening inflation and economic hardship. President Masoud Pezeshkian and government officials have acknowledged the protests, pledging dialogue with demonstrators and promising reforms to stabilize the monetary system. Iran's parliamentary speaker, Baghir Ghalifa, stated that the people's concerns must be addressed.
که دغدغه و اعتراض مردم در خصوص مشکلات معیشتی باید با مسئولیت پذیری کامل پاسخ داده شود و گفتگو به ویژه با نمایندگان اصناف و اتخاذ اقدامات لازم با محوریت افزایش قدرت خرید مردم و اصلاح روند تصمیم گیری های اقتصادی در دستور کار مسئولان اجرایی قرار گیرد.
The unrest adds to a pattern of repeated protests over the past few years, highlighting public frustration with economic pressure, sanctions and currency volatility. Authorities have previously suppressed similar demonstrations with crackdowns, but the government now says it will listen to protesters' legitimate demands. Shaul Satka, who is a political commentator, joins me now live from Tel Aviv. Thanks, Shaul, for joining me. How do you see these protests now escalating?
It's too early to tell at this stage. We've had a number of waves of protests in Iran over the past 5 to 10 years, and in general, put down with alacrity by the Iranian regime, who have been in power there since 1979. Whether this round of protests is what finally pushes the regime out, seeing as they really weakened over the past year with the loss of all their proxies from Hezbollah to Hamas to the Houthis, proxies that they essentially bankrupted their nation to supply. They also lost their ballistic missile program and most of their nuclear program as well in June. All that has been their primary goal over the past few years, the past decades, in fact. And that's all gone. It was all for nothing. They bankrupted their economy for nothing. In 1979, when the Islamic regime took power, if you wanted to buy an ounce of gold, you had to pay 15,000 rial. Today, to buy 1 ounce of gold, you need to spend over 6 billion rial. They have degraded their currency over the period that they ruled by a factor of something like 500,000. That's the valuation of their currency. As a result, the people are entirely without any hard capital. They have very little. They don't have any water. And things are very tough there. And you see the videos, it's heartbreaking, but hopefully that heartbreak will lead to something new.
Do you see a dialogue happening anytime soon between the protesters and the regime?
The fact that the regime are willing to express their keenness to have dialogue with the protesters really just tells you that this actually might be the final push. This might be the point at which they are so weak that they're even willing to offer this dialogue to try and compromise with the people that are trying to overthrow them. They are ethnic minorities in every direction. They're on the Baluchis and the Kurds, various ethnic minorities that would rather be independent of the Iranian regime, which by itself is kind of a mini empire. So yes, they are willing to express willingness to negotiate, implies that they are especially weak, and really this might be the end. We have to hope so for the people of Iran who've been suffering under that regime for many, many years.
All right, thanks Shaul for now, but do continue to stay on with me as we proceed ahead. Now viewers, some breaking news in fact coming in. Eurostar has advised passengers to delay travel plans after power supply problems caused major disruption in the Channel Tunnel. Services at both Folkestone and Calais terminals have been temporarily suspended, affecting trains between London, Paris, Lille, Brussels and Amsterdam. Eurostar says trains that are able to run are experiencing severe delays and last-minute cancellations, and passengers are urged to check schedules before traveling. Officials are working to restore normal service as quickly as possible, but the disruption is expected to continue until the power issue is resolved. Travelers are advised to stay updated through Eurostar's website and customer service channels. Now moving ahead, let's track some news from Syria. Authorities have imposed an overnight curfew in the port city of Latakia. This comes after attacks in predominantly Alawite neighborhoods a day prior. The Interior Ministry announced a curfew effective from 5 p.m. on December 31, 2025. Many attacked Alawite majority neighborhoods, damaging cars and vandalizing shops. The attacks come a day after 3 people were killed during mass protests by the minority community that followed a bombing in Homs. According to a security source, one of them was a member of Syria's security forces. Syrian authorities have said that curfew and tightened security is part of measures taken to monitor the situation on the ground, enhance security and stability, and ensure the safety of citizens and property. I now invite Shaul to join me back in the discussion here.
Good to be back.
Shaul, thanks for staying on. How many days do you think that the government will be able to keep up with imposing this curfew? What real changes are required?
It's unclear how many days exactly is hard to say. It could be that it is required to be in permanent place, because the Alawite minority, there's approximately 2 million people, 10% give or take from the population of Syria that remains after the civil war, are the Alawite minority. Until last year, the Alawites had been in complete hegemonic control of Syria from the 1970s, when Hafez al-Assad and then his son Bashar al-Assad ruled. And they ruled with an iron fist, and they appointed all their relatives, cousins, and so on to the top positions. So there was an Alawite rule over the majority non-Alawite population, and the resentments that are retained from that period are very intense. People who are not Alawites in Syria remember the rule of the Alawite and are not happy with that. The issue is that for Jalani and his nascent junta, let's say, for the entire Syrian seaboard, they have the two ports, and Tarsus and Latakia, where some of the protests were, and where they've imposed curfews. So they very much need, if they're going to have a functioning state, they need to deal with the Alawites. They, on the one hand, are keen to persecute them to some level to get revenge, but on the other hand, if they persecute them too far, there'll be an insurgency. At the same time, we have to remember that the Alawites, because they had hegemonic control over the country for so many years, unlike the Druze, they don't necessarily have their own trained militias, like the Druze and the Sunnis. So they are very vulnerable, and it would not be shocking to see war crimes and massacres committed against them over the next years as the Jalani regime takes shape.
How much of our trade is also going to be affected by these protests, Shaul?
Absolutely, because the only two ports are controlled. So really, that's the last things that they control of any value to anyone in Syria. They really hold a bottleneck on trade out of Syria, at least via sea. And via land, you can't really do much trade because the borders there are so dangerous. You can't trade bulk goods over those borders very easily. So if Syria is to build up its economy, it does need those ports. And those ports are controlled by people who they're going to have to deal with, who are from this ethnic minority, who Muslims consider to be heretical because of their syncretic beliefs, let's say. So very complicated situation there, and time will tell how it works out.
Absolutely, we'll watch out indeed. But for now, thank you very much, Shaul, for joining me. And let's cover some news from Bangladesh. Chief Advisor Mohammad Yunus has expressed deep sorrow over the death of former Prime Minister Khaleda Zia, saying the nation has lost a great guardian. The BNP chairperson and two-time Prime Minister died at the age of 80 after a prolonged illness while undergoing treatment in Dhaka. Further condoling her death, Yunus said that with Khaleda's death, the country has lost an experienced and proven stateswoman. The government had declared her a VVIP of the state earlier this month. The chief advisor stated that her role in establishing democracy and a multi-party political culture will be remembered forever. Let's listen into what Yunus said in his message.
দেশবাসী আসসালামু আলাইকুম আজ আমাদের পুরো জাতি গভীর শোক ও বেদনায় নিস্তব্ধ দেশের গণতান্ত্রিক রাজনীতির শীর্ষ নেত্রী সাবেক প্রধানমন্ত্রী ও বিএনপি চেয়ারপারসন বেগম খালেদা জিয়া আর আমাদের মাঝে নেই বেগম খালেদা জিয়ার ইন্তেকালে আমরা গভীরভাবে শোকাহত ও মর্মাহত তার মৃত্যুতে জাতি এক মহান অভিভাবককে হারিয়েছে এই গভীর শোকের মুহূর্তে আমি তার পরিবারের সদস্যবৃন্দ রাজনৈতিক সহকর্মী এবং অগণিত কর্মী সমর্থকদের প্রতি সমগ্র জাতির পক্ষ থেকে আন্তরিক সমবেদনা জানাচ্ছি বেগম খালেদা জিয়া ছিলেন বাংলাদেশের রাজনীতিতে এক পরম মহিমান্বিত ব্যক্তিত্ব গণতন্ত্র বহুদলীয় রাজনৈতিক সংস্কৃতি এবং জনগণের অধিকার প্রতিষ্ঠার সংগ্রামে তার অসামান্য ভূমিকা ইতিহাসে অম্লান হয়ে থাকবে স্বৈরাচার ও ফ্যাসিবাদের বিরুদ্ধে তাঁর আপসহীন নেতৃত্ব বারবার জাতিকে গণতন্ত্রহীন পরিস্থিতি থেকে উত্তরণের পথ দেখিয়েছে এবং মুক্তির প্রেরণা জুগিয়েছে।
Moving on, viewers, according to reports, China is requiring chip makers to use at least 50% domestically made equipment for adding new capacity. This comes as Beijing pushes to build a self-sufficient semiconductor supply chain. While the rule is not publicly documented, the chip makers seeking state approval to build or expand their plants have been told by authorities in recent months that they must prove through procurement tenders that at least half their equipment will be Chinese made. The mandate is one of the most significant measures Beijing has introduced to wean itself off reliance on foreign technology, a push that gathered pace after the US tightened technology export restrictions in 2023, banning sales of advanced AI chips and semiconductor equipment to China. While the US export restrictions blocked the sale of some of the most advanced tools, the 50% rule is leading Chinese manufacturers to choose domestic suppliers even in areas where foreign equipment from the US, Japan, South Korea and Europe remain available. And India's gig economy workers have intensified protests against rapid delivery targets as unions call for a nationwide strike on December 25 and again on New Year's Eve. Nearly 40,000 delivery partners across major cities joined demonstrations demanding a ban on 10-minute delivery models, better wages and social security. The strike, which is led by the Indian Federation of App-Based Transport Workers, affected deliveries in parts of Gurugram and Delhi, while operations in Bengaluru remained largely unaffected. Workers from platforms including Swiggy, Zomato, Zepto, Blinkit, Amazon and Flipkart participated. Unions say algorithm-driven systems force riders into speeding, long hours and unsafe conditions, while incomes continue to fall. Surveys show most delivery workers earn 200 to 600 rupees a day, work over 10 hours and lack health or accident insurance. Nearly 86% oppose instant delivery models, citing rising accidents and stress. The unions have urged government intervention, calling for regulation or platform companies' withdrawal of unsafe targets of delivery and a national security framework, warning that convenience is being prioritized over workers' lives. That's all we have time for. Do keep watching NewsX World for more international news and updates.